My name is John, and as the oldest sibling in my family, I've always carried the weight of responsibility, especially since my younger sister, Katie, and I lost our dad. When Dad passed away 4 years ago in a hit-and-run accident, it changed everything. The driver who took his life was never caught, leaving us not only grieving but also feeling a deep sense of injustice. Dad was the sole breadwinner of the family, and when he was gone, the burden of providing fell squarely on my shoulders. At the time, I was just finishing college and had to grow up quickly. Despite my own grief, I knew I had to step up for my family. Fortunately, I was able to land a steady job right after graduation. My mom, having spent her entire life as a homemaker, struggled to find work while dealing with the devastating loss of her husband. I reassured her that I'd take care of everything, promising her she didn't need to worry about finances. At first, my job paid enough to cover our living expenses, but as time went on, the costs of running the household began to increase. Supporting my mom and sister required more than just my 9-to-5 job, so I started taking on overtime and even picked up part-time gigs to make ends meet. I've spent countless days working long hours without a single proper break, knowing that my family's well-being depended on my efforts. There were nights when exhaustion weighed heavily on me, but I kept pushing forward. Providing for my family became both my purpose and my duty. Unfortunately, my sister Katie couldn't be more different from me. She's chosen to pursue a career as a spiritual teacher, which, while meaningful in its own way, hasn't brought any financial relief to our family. Her work is more passion-driven than practical, and her small pool of clients pays her very little. I respect her dedication to her calling, but the reality is, it's not enough. What's more frustrating is that Katie makes no effort to help around the house or contribute to our expenses. Instead, she regularly asks me for money, sometimes for things that are completely unreasonable. For example, Katie insists on shopping exclusively at an upscale organic store, where the prices are nearly double what they'd be at a regular grocery store. While I believe in healthy living, it's frustrating that she chooses such expensive options when it's my wallet footing the bill. On top of that, Katie has a habit of spending extravagantly on beauty treatments. She's always getting her nails done or going for pricey hair treatments and expects me to cover the cost. There have been times when she's demanded as much as $300 for her trips to the salon. These differences in how we view responsibility have led to frequent arguments. I've tried to talk to Katie about making smarter financial decisions, but she insists that her lifestyle is non-negotiable. She says she's following her calling and doesn't seem to understand or care how much strain it puts on me. Every time I try to put my foot down and tell Katie that I can't keep funding her lifestyle, she throws the same argument at me. That as her older sibling, it's my duty to support her no matter what. She accuses me of trolling her when I refuse to give her money, and if I continue holding my ground, she takes her anger out on our mom. Katie has no problem yelling and complaining to Mom about me, blaming me for all her problems. Worse, she's been known to steal whatever money I give Mom straight from her purse, leaving Mom without enough to buy the things she needs. When this happens, Mom is forced to come to me for more money. No matter how the situation unfolds, the weight of everyone's needs always lands back on my shoulders. Mom, who sees both sides of the situation, has tried to reason with Katie countless times. She's gently encouraged her to find a steady job, or at least a part-time one if she insists on continuing her spiritual practice. But Katie doesn't budge. She refuses to adjust her lifestyle, choosing instead to live in a way that is entirely out of sync with our family's financial reality. Her refusal to contribute has only deepened the strain in our family. It feels like I'm the only one carrying this burden, and honestly, it's starting to wear me down. Now let me tell you about the most recent incident that brought me here. Katie had been dating this guy who, from the little I saw, was unreliable and untrustworthy. He never publicly acknowledged her as his girlfriend and seemed to enjoy stringing her along. On top of that, he frequently hung out with other women behind her back. Eventually, Katie caught him red-handed with one of his so-called friends. When she confronted him, he refused to apologize and argued that he hadn't done anything wrong. Things escalated quickly, and their argument became physical. Feeling hurt and betrayed, Katie punched him in the face and started throwing his belongings around the room. She even threatened him and any other woman he might be involved with. The commotion got so loud that the neighbors called the police. When the officers arrived, They saw that Katie had been the one to initiate physical violence. Because of the damage she'd caused and her assault, she was arrested. Luckily, her boyfriend agreed not to press charges, and since this was her first offense, the police let her go with just a warning. I thought that going through something so dramatic might force her to reflect on her actions and take responsibility for once. But I was wrong. Rather than showing remorse, Katie doubled down on her behavior. She openly declared that she had no regrets and believed she had every right to handle the situation the way she did. There wasn't a single hint of acknowledgement for the trouble she caused or the danger she put herself and others in. Since the breakup, Katie has done nothing but sulk around the house, using the failed relationship as an excuse to avoid responsibility altogether. Instead of moving forward, she's spiraling even deeper into a reckless lifestyle. Most days she goes out drinking with friends, coming home late at night completely drunk. More often than not, she brings strangers back to the house, creating chaos for everyone. I've tried speaking to her, hoping a serious conversation might help her see the harm she's doing to herself and to the rest of us. But every time I bring up my concerns, she brushes me off, acting like I'm the one overreacting. This week, Mom pulled me aside while Katie was out so we could talk openly about her. Mom admitted she was genuinely worried. She revealed something I hadn't known before. Katie has started using drugs. I'd assumed Katie's behavior was limited to drinking and the occasional weed, but hearing this changed everything. It made sense why she'd been asking for more and more money from me each week. Mom went on to share her growing fear that Katie's self-destructive behavior might spiral even further if we didn't step up and intervene. She seemed desperate, and I agreed that something needed to be done. I suggested that it was time to seek professional help, maybe rehab, therapy, or a counselor, someone who might succeed in reaching Katie where we clearly hadn't. None of our attempts to talk to her had worked. Every conversation ended in arguments or her dismissing us entirely. But Mom hesitated at the idea of involving a stranger. She believed that, as family, it was our duty to support Katie ourselves. Then, out of nowhere, she dropped a bombshell. She had been researching on her own and found what she called the perfect solution. It was a luxury wellness retreat that allowed participants to bring a companion. Mom thought this would be an ideal opportunity for her to spend quality time with Katie in a therapeutic setting. I was stunned, not just by the idea itself but by how completely impractical it was. A luxury retreat? Where would we even get the money for that? My income already barely covered our bills and expenses. Splurging on a high-end retreat wasn't just unrealistic, it was impossible. When I pointed out that we couldn't afford something like that, Mom gently reminded me about the money I'd been saving for months to buy a used car. She suggested, with the calm confidence of someone who had already decided for me, that I could use that money to pay for her and Katie's retreat instead. My stomach dropped. I'd been saving for that car not as a luxury but as a necessity. My commute to work is almost 3 hours each way, leaving me completely drained every day. A car wasn't just about convenience. It would dramatically improve my daily life and reduce the exhaustion that came with those long, grueling trips. Beyond that, the car would benefit the entire family, cutting down on the costs and logistical nightmares of public transport and Uber rides. I explained all of this to Mom, laying out how essential the car was and how it would help us all in the long run. I told her that, as much as I cared about Katie, I couldn't sacrifice something so critical for her. But Mom was unwavering. She insisted that Katie needed this retreat more than I needed a car. She spoke with the desperation of someone who had already decided this was the only solution, saying she couldn't bear the thought of losing another loved one after Dad's death. She was convinced that this retreat would be transformative for Katie. I tried to reason with her, suggesting a more practical approach. Instead of spending a fortune on a retreat, we could find a local counselor or therapist who could work with Katie regularly to address her deeper issues. I even offered to handle the research and promised to find a reputable therapist by the end of the week. All Mom needed to do was have an honest, heartfelt conversation with Katie and encourage her to give it a try. Mom didn't argue much after that, and I thought I had finally gotten through to her. I felt relieved, thinking we had reached a sensible compromise. But then last night everything changed. I came home after a long, exhausting day at work, only to find the house eerily quiet. Usually, Mom would be in the living room watching TV or curled up with a book. Katie might be blasting music or on the phone with her friends. But this time there was nothing, no voices, no movement, no signs of life. I called out for them, hoping they'd pop up from somewhere. But the house was empty. No response. No sign of anyone. I thought maybe they had gone out to buy groceries or run errands. As I walked into the kitchen, I noticed a note taped to the refrigerator. The handwriting was familiar, Mom's. My stomach churned as I peeled it off and began to read. Sorry we couldn't wait for you. Katie and I are on our way to the luxury retreat. I know you'll be upset, but honestly, money can always be earned back. Your sister's mental health comes first. We'll see you in a week. I stood there staring at the note, my mind struggling to process the words in front of me. My stomach churned with a mix of disbelief, anger, and despair. Feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, I rushed to my computer and logged into my bank account. As the screen loaded, the reality hit me like a freight train. Every dollar I had carefully saved for months gone. Mom, who had access to my account, had drained it entirely. My hard-earned savings, the money I had planned to use for the car that would make my life so much easier, was gone. I just sat there, staring at the empty balance, unable to hold back the tears. Betrayal doesn't even begin to cover what I felt. How could my own mother do this to me? How could she take something I had worked so tirelessly to save and use it to fund a luxury retreat for my ungrateful sister? The words from her note haunted me. Money can always be earned back. How could she say that when I was the only one in the house actually earning anything? Mom barely contributed, and Kiki, with her entitled attitude, contributed absolutely nothing. I had been the one sacrificing my time, my energy, and my future to keep this family afloat. And now they had taken the one thing I had worked so hard for, a lifeline that would have made everything a little easier for me. I called Mom immediately, leaving voicemail after voicemail, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and pain. I demanded an explanation, pleaded for her to understand the depth of how deeply she had hurt me. But she didn't answer a single call. She ignored me, choosing avoidance instead of taking responsibility for what she had done. As for Kiki, she responded with just one message, a smug, infuriating wink emoji. No apology, no remorse, just a little digital smirk, as if to say she couldn't care less about the damage they'd caused or the pain I was feeling. That simple emoji broke something inside me. It was a cold reminder of how little my sacrifices meant to her, of how she had always taken me for granted without a second thought. I felt utterly alone, betrayed, unsupported. And yet, all I could think about was how much I had given for a family that had done nothing to show they appreciated me. Reddit, I need to ask, am I wrong for being this angry? Am I overreacting? Or do I have every right to be furious with my mom and sister for what they've done? Update 1. Thank you so much to everyone who has shared their thoughts and advice. Your comments have really helped me reflect on this entire situation. You're absolutely right. Mom and Kiki have been taking advantage of me for years, and I've let it happen. Let me explain why. When Dad passed away, I was devastated. I felt like it was my responsibility to step up and take care of the family. I was the only one with a job, and somehow I convinced myself that it was my duty to ensure we stayed afloat, even if it meant sacrificing my own needs. At the time, I was so focused on keeping everything together that I didn't notice how little effort Mom and Kiki were putting in to support me, or even themselves. I worked myself to exhaustion, believing I was doing the right thing for the family. But now, after losing my savings in such a cold and calculated way, I realize that I've been taken for granted. Mom and Kiki seem to assume I'll always be there to pick up the pieces, but what about my own life? What about my dreams, my future? To everyone suggesting I report my mom to the police, I've thought about it, but I can't bring myself to do that. As angry and disappointed as I am, I don't want her to end up in jail. Instead, I've decided to give her a consequence that's even more impactful. I'm moving out. I should have done this years ago, but I stayed because I thought they needed me. Now, I see that staying has only enabled them to continue living off me without any accountability. If I weren't shouldering all of their financial burdens, I could actually build a stable, secure life for myself. It's hard to admit, but I'm starting to realize that my loyalty to my family has come at the expense of my own happiness. I have so much to reflect on tonight. Update 2. It's been a week since my last update, and I've made some significant changes, thanks to all of your strong suggestions and support. The first thing I did was start packing up all the things I had bought for the house over the years. kitchen appliances, dishes, home decor, and countless other items I'd purchased to make our home functional and comfortable. It was a long process, but as I packed, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I then reached out to a close friend, who graciously offered to let me stay with her temporarily while I searched for an apartment of my own. With her help, I moved all my belongings and left the house before Mom and Kiki returned from their retreat. I didn't leave a note, an explanation, or even a hint about what I was doing. I knew any attempt at a conversation about my decision would only fall on deaf ears, and I wanted them to feel the impact of my absence without any warning. Sure enough, the moment they came back and found the house stripped of everything I'd contributed, the calls started pouring in. My phone was soon flooded with voicemails from Mom, each one increasingly frantic. She wanted to know where I was and what had happened to all the things in the house. The irony of it all was almost laughable. Only now, faced with an empty house and no one to rely on, did they start reaching out in desperation. Now they were the ones left without answers. I let them stew for a few hours before finally calling Mom back. She picked up immediately and told me she had me on speakerphone with Kiki sitting right next to her. They both wanted to know why I had left so suddenly. Mom quickly launched into justifications, saying she knew I was upset about her taking my money but insisted I shouldn't still be mad because Kiki was feeling much better after her mini vacation. She said this as if that was supposed to erase the betrayal I felt. I kept my composure and calmly informed her that I had moved out for good. I told her that from now on they were on their own. Immediately the tone shifted. Mom and Kiki started demanding to know why I had done something so drastic. Mom tried to argue that I should have talked with her before leaving the house like that. I didn't hold back. I reminded her that she and Kiki had gone behind my back, drained every cent of my savings without so much as a heads up, and spent it all on themselves. I pointed out how they had ignored my calls all week, choosing to avoid any accountability until now, when they returned to find the house empty and my financial support gone. I made it crystal clear that I was done supporting them. They had made their choices and now they could handle the consequences. If they wanted to be on their own, they could have it. I wasn't coming back. That's when Mom's pleading started. She begged me not to leave them like this, promising that she was now willing to sit down and talk things over. But Kiki, she was shouting in the background louder than ever, demanding to know why I was punishing them by starving them and leaving them behind. All we did was take a well-deserved break, she yelled. Her entitlement was beyond infuriating. Mom, trying to keep the peace, argued that the kitchen appliances were gone and that there was barely any food left in the house. She tried to guilt me by saying that while she understood my frustration, my reaction was an overreaction. She urged me to calm down and come back home, but for the first time I felt no pull of guilt, no desire to smooth things over, no compulsion to run back and fix everything. Instead of feeling guilty or reconsidering, I knew I was done. That realization was freeing. This wasn't a tantrum. It was me finally standing up for myself and setting boundaries that had been ignored for far too long. When Mom suggested that if I returned, she would never make the same mistake again, I just laughed. I told her flat out that I couldn't care less if she did. I'd already taken steps to protect myself. I had removed her access to my bank account and wasn't going to send them any more money or bail them out. From now on, they were on their own. I reminded her they still had the house Dad paid for, and if they wanted to stay afloat, they needed to find jobs and take responsibility. Kiki, of course, started yelling, demanding to know how they were supposed to survive without food or money. Mom, angry and desperate, joined in, calling me selfish and stubborn-headed. But I wasn't fazed. I'd heard all their guilt trips before. This time I ignored their screaming and calmly ended the call. Then I blocked both of them from contacting me again. I can't lie, it felt incredibly satisfying. After years of putting myself second and giving everything for them, I was finally standing up for myself. This would be a tough lesson for them, but they needed to face the consequences of exploiting my hard work. Since that call, I've had no contact with my family. I've blocked them from my phone and social media, and for the first time in years I'm living life on my own terms. Feels like a weight has been lifted. Update 3. To everyone worried about Mom or Kiki showing up at my job, don't worry. I've already informed my boss about the situation, and several colleagues know how irrational they can be. Everyone's been very supportive, and if Kiki ever does show up to harass me, I'll file a police complaint. That's a line I won't let them cross. As for how they're surviving without food or money, honestly, I don't know, and I no longer care. Maybe there's still a bit of the money they took from me left, or maybe they found other ways to get by. They're adults and they have a roof over their heads, so they aren't completely without resources. They'll figure it out or they won't. That's no longer my responsibility. I've spent years sacrificing my own well-being to look after them. It's their turn to sort out their own mess. I've made my choice and I'm moving forward. Update 4. Wow, it's been 6 months since my last update. Life has been going great. After months of saving while staying with my friend, I've finally moved into my own place. It's not big, but it's mine, and that's all that matters. I've also started saving for a car again, just as I always dreamed. It's so empowering to finally focus on my own goals without the constant financial drain from my family. As for Mom and Kiki, they did try to reach out a few months ago. They even showed up at my office one evening, and I'll admit, seeing them shook me. Mom looked absolutely exhausted, her eyes sunken like she hadn't slept in days. She ran straight to me, crying, pleading for me to come back home. I wanted to feel sympathy for her, but I stayed firm. I told her no. I wasn't going back to that environment. Hearing this, Mom cried even harder, like she couldn't believe what I was saying. Kiki, of course, jumped in, blaming me for abandoning them and telling me how difficult their life had been. As if that was somehow my fault. She insisted that I needed to stop playing around and come back home since they'd already learned their lesson. Mom tried pulling the emotional card, saying Dad would be disappointed in me for abandoning them, and that he would have wanted us to stick together. I stayed calm and replied firmly that I believed Dad would be proud of me for cutting my losses and walking away. I wasn't going to let them drag me down anymore. I told them how much better my life had become without their constant demands for money and support. I warned them that showing up at my office unannounced was a blatant disrespect of my boundaries, and that if they ever did it again, I'd call the police. They couldn't force me to go back home when I didn't want to. Eventually, they left begrudgingly, but even as they walked away, Kiki begged me for just a few $100s one last time. I refused. That was the last time I saw them in person. Since then, there's been no further contact. Through friends in my old neighborhood, I've heard that Kiki still hasn't found a proper job, while Mom has taken a position at a local diner to bring in money. It breaks my heart that my poor mother has to work to support Kiki, who still hasn't stepped up. Apparently, Kiki's current boyfriend has moved in with them. From what I've heard, he has a job and isn't a complete freeloader, so at least they have some stability now. But as for me, I've put in too much effort to heal and move forward to let them drag me back. This is my final update about my family. I'm choosing to live my life without the weight of their drama hanging over me. Thank you all for your support. It's helped me more than you'll ever know.